Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for all your great comments regarding my previous Vancouver Biblioadventures. This is film number 5, I think, and I've got 3 events to tell you about to catch up on, and I'm going to go in reverse order. So last night, my friend Kathy and I went to an evening with Elif Batuman, and she was in conversation with Anakana Schofield. The event had sign language interpretation, and I was really happy to see that the Vancouver Writers Festival is making events more accessible. So, Anakana Schofield, who is the author of Bina, among other novels, is quite an entertaining personality. And if you've read anything by Elif Batuman, you know that she also has a very witty way about her. And they talked about how her book, The Possessed, which is about a group of students studying Russian literature, and The Idiot, and her most recent novel, Either Or, all form a sort of triptych, because Batuman has based these books on her own experiences in academia. The Possessed is nonfiction, and she said that the reason why that one is nonfiction is because her publisher told her that there's a lot of people who wish they had read Russian novels, and they would be interested in reading what those books are about without them having to actually read them, and so they could just pick up her short book and learn from it. But if it was published as a novel, then they wouldn't be allowed to learn from it. So that's the story. And it definitely made me want to read The Possessed. I've already read The Idiot and Either Or, and now I feel like I'm going to complete the triptych. After The Idiot came out, Batuman said that readers were disappointed and told her that they wish that 2 of the characters, Celine and Ivan, had had sex. And that really surprised her, because it was based on her own experiences and nothing like that happened to her. So it was like beyond the realm of possibility as far as she was concerned. In Either Or, Celine is a central character again, and this time she does have some sexual experiences. And she said writing it made her think a lot about non-consensual sex. And she said in 2017 was when she started a lesbian relationship herself, and she read Consensual Heterosexuality by Adrienne, and that made her think back on her novel The Idiot, and how she had been thinking about the A-list relationship in that book as being the one between Celine and Ivan. And looking back on it, she realized the important relationship was actually between Celine and her best friend, Svetlana. Now, Svetlana is in Either Or as well, and so that friendship or relationship between them progresses. An interesting thing that she said about Either Or was that her original idea was that half of the book was going to be in the format of a novel, and the other half was going to be an essay about how novels ruined her life. And part of the reason why she changed that was because she realized that Celine's life isn't ruined. That it's actually, it just took more time for her to realize how novels have affected her. I really liked that she said one of the things that she's learned from teaching creative writing is that anyone can be a writer. She said, if we could remove shame in general, it would not only improve our general health and well-being in our society, but as a side benefit, it would also encourage more people to write. In the questions from the audience, somebody asked her, what's her guilty pleasure? And then she clarified, I mean, like, what trash do you read or like to watch on TV? And I loved Batuman's answer to that, because she said that as part of her efforts to eliminate shame from her life, she doesn't think of her choices that way. What she reads, what she watches on TV. And she did go on to talk about some of those things, but yeah, I feel the same way about calling what we choose to read a guilty pleasure or trash. I've talked about that before. Now, Anakana Schofield, well, she added kind of a whackadoodle element to this conversation. I think I can thank Hannah of Hannah's Books for reminding me of that. Whackadoodle is quite a useful term to use sometimes. Anyway, she's a bit off the wall, and I found her extremely entertaining. However, my companion at this event, Kathy, did not like the way that Schofield was inserting herself into the conversation. She said she was making it all about her, but I disagreed. So we ended up talking about that quite a bit afterwards. I think moderators really do make a difference at these writers' events. The earlier event that I had attended was moderated by Omar Akkad, who is also the guest curator here at the festival this year. He's the author of What Strange Paradise, which won the Giller Prize last year, and he also wrote American War. Now, in the event, which was called Wildness, subtitled Stories for an Unraveling World, the issue of comps came up. Those are the comparative titles that publishers want writers to supply so that readers will have an idea about the type of content. And actually, the panelists, I'll tell you about them in a minute, but the panelists talk about how, maybe it's more for the publishers, that there's an editor that really likes a book, and then those comps, those comparisons, are what they use to convince the person in charge, the publisher, to pay out the money to publish this book. And yeah, so Omar Akkad said that when American War came out, one of the comparisons was saying that it was the next Hunger Games. And he said that based on that, the movie rights were purchased. And he said before, whoever this person was, before they'd even read the book. And then he never heard from them again. So the three authors in this panel were Kim Fu with her book Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century, shortlisted for the Giller this year, and John Elizabeth Stintzi, who everybody was calling Jess, so by the initials, so I'll call them Jess too. And their novel is, most recent one is My Volcano, which I loved. So glad to hear them talk about it. And actually, there's going to be a book launch in Edmonton on Monday, and I'm going to that book launch at Class Bookshop. And then the third author is somebody I hadn't heard of before, Madhur Anand. She is a scientist as well as a poet, and Akkad said that she was like the linchpin for putting this panel together, because he loves her most recent collection of poetry, Parasitic Oscillations, so much that was the initial idea for doing this panel. And I bought the book. When I heard her read from it, I had to have it. Actually, her reading was in tandem with Kim Fu. Anand would read a passage, and then Fu would read a passage, Anand would read a passage, and Fu would read a passage of a poem that was done with found text from some scientific paper about birds. And Kim Fu did the same thing with her reading. So the short story that she read from Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century was the one that's written in dialogue format about a virtual reality operator. And so Anand did one person's voice who was seeking to arrange a virtual reality experience, and Kim Fu was the operator who's these rules are explained in the handbook. Yeah, it was very well done. I guess backstage, Omar Akkad had asked Jess to summarize My Volcano, and Jess apparently told him, "Screw you," or something even less polite than that. But later on, Jess said that their novel is about what it's like to live in this world right now. And I totally agree with that. That's part of why I love that book so much, I think. There's a concept of ambiguous grief that is new to me that they talked about in this panel. Ambiguous grief is described as the grief that's leading up to something. So say you know your mother has terminal illness, and in the period before she dies there's an ambiguous grief, and then afterwards the grieving has a closure in sight. And all of these authors were talking about how climate emergency and the reducing biodiversity that's happening is causing us as a society to be experiencing ambiguous grief. Kim Fu said, "In our world today, it's like there's no time and space to grieve." And that's the dominant aspect of grief that comes up in her stories in Lesser Known Monsters. She also described what the difference is to her between writing novels. She's published a couple before this collection of short stories. The difference between a novel and a short story. She said a novel is kind of like you are at the grocery store and you're kind of wandering through the fruits and vegetables. You pick up an apple and you admire it from all angles, carefully set it down, pick up something else and evaluate it. Whereas a short story, you're in the grocery store, straight to the oranges, pick up one, squeeze every drop of juice out of it, and then your reader downs that juice just like a shot. There's a bracing effect that she talked about that I understood exactly what she meant. Akkad asked the authors how they think forward in what they want to write, given today's world's situation. And Jess said it gives them even more impetus to write exactly what they want to write, not what they think is going to sell. They write what they're passionate about. And Kim Fu said that for her, art is what gives her solace. And that's what she also wants to give to people who read her work. Someone from the audience asked for their recommendations of who they should read, and Akkad said, well, I like to read Stone Cold Bummers, so maybe I won't say. Jess recommended The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin, and Anand recited a poem from Karen Solie from her collection Pigeon. I think it was the title poem that she recited. And Kim Fu said, go to an art museum. Surround yourself with art. Yeah, I love that recommendation. And then the last event that I haven't yet told you about, this was on Friday that I went to the narrator's tale, subtitled Playing with Truth. And the three authors in it were Billy Ray Belcourt with his novel A Minor Chorus, and Iain Reid with his novel We Spread, and the Portuguese author João Reis with his novel A Translator's Bride, and he translated the book himself. The moderator was David Ebner. Now, there was quite a long time lapse, Reis said, between the time that his book was first published in Portuguese and when it eventually got translated to English. There was supposed to be a different translator working on it. He didn't explain exactly what happened, but he said that when he was translating it, he ended up tweaking and changing some of the novel as he went along. It's told in the viewpoint of a very cranky guy, and we get his inner monologue, but also his dialogue with other people where he's very polite, outward facing. And then he said that his the original Portuguese edition had to be reissued because there were no more copies, and so he made the same changes to the Portuguese edition, so the English and Portuguese now are very similar. He said he really enjoyed writing the contrast between that inner voice full of rage and the polite outer voice. It does sound very good. Whenever I go to these events, I come away saying, I gotta read that, I gotta read that, I gotta read that. It's a great problem to have. Reis said that he never wanted to be a writer. When he was a kid, he wanted to be a veterinarian. And actually, that's what he studied. And then after he completed his veterinarian studies, then he decided to study Swedish literature. And so he became a translator. So the time frame of his book, The Translator's Bride, is very short. I think something like 48 hours. And so he tried to mimic that when he was writing the book, and he wrote it in 4 days. And all the other authors on stage are going, whoa. And he said, while he was writing it, he was also working on a translation for some Swedish guy's work. So there was that too. Now, Iain Reid's book, We Spread, is about an elderly woman whose husband, who was an artist, has died. He read from it and made it less interesting than I had thought originally when I read the description of the book. But then later on, when he was talking about the novel and about the question of, if you make art and don't show it, are you an artist? You know, that sort of philosophical question that does really interest me. Well, I think he's maybe just a guy who's not good at reading his own work, and I'm definitely going to give We Spread a try. He talked about how we as a society seem to be afraid of death and dying, and he said he doesn't quite understand why that is. So his perspective, I think, is kind of interesting. Another thing that Iain Reid said is that he wants readers to interpret his stories in their own way, which is how he also likes to experience books that he's reading. He likes books that are open to interpretation. So do I. So do I. Let me know if that's the case with you also. Billy Ray Belcourt talked about writing in different genres, poetry and essays, his memoirs written in essays, and now he's written this novel. And he said he feels like poetry and theory are streets in the same neighborhood, and he exists at their intersection. And in the novel that's in his novel, the novel that's not yet written, because it's about someone very much like Billy Ray Belcourt, who is writing a novel, but in the novel it's not yet written. And he sees that as the tantalizing goal that's being worked towards. And he finds that his novel is more about depression and happiness than it is about actually writing a novel. One of the difficulties he said he had is that he tends to think in images, which works really well for poetry, but you need to have some kind of larger vision when you're putting a novel together and live in a larger scale. Of course, I was thinking about how much I enjoyed reading A Minor Chorus, and I'm thinking I might reread it in November. There's an Indigenous readathon in November that's hosted by Kim, the Native Lady book warrior. I think it's called Skoden Readathon, and I am planning to participate. Rereading, I think, will give me even more from Billy Ray Belcourt's book. So many possibilities. So I'm going to wrap it up here for now. I've got one final event to go to today. It is a tribute to Mavis Gallant this evening. I will tell you all about that in my next video. And I want to thank you so much for joining me on this biblio-adventure, and I look forward to your comments always. Thanks so much for watching.